this is a myth busting session. And what I mean by that is that I want to take this opportunity to kind of get a sense for what it is that it says that my screen sharing is paused. 1 second. Okay. Let's see if I can resume. I appreciate everybody's patience. I think I'm back. All right. Myth busting. So what I want to talk a little bit about is what we know from our members about small business versus what is kind of, common misconceptions or the way that maybe the media treats small business. And from our perspective, we have this really unique opportunity to talk about what small business owners are facing because we've been doing the work in small groups, these peer group support groups for 10 years. We've had over 1,000 businesses participate over the time. And our program is generally a 3-year program. So we also have long-term engagement with these businesses that come into our program. And we really, we've got 40, actually, I think about 45 peer groups now today, growing every day with over 400 members. We serve different industries, whether that's product-based businesses, service businesses, business to business or business to consumer. We really have a unique opportunity to kind of access lots of different types of business owners and hear what it is that they're dealing with. All right, so there is there's a lot of common misconceptions out there, and I'm going to present a few of them. First of all, if you want to put some comments in the chat, I'd be curious to know, when you hear small business, about what percentage of business do you think small businesses have more than 20 employees? The SBA obviously says that a small business has 500 or fewer employees and less than $1 million in revenue. Less than 100 million in revenue. And as I think I may have failed to mention on the previous slide, we serve businesses that they have to be in existence for more than a year, but they could have anywhere from 30,000 a year in revenue all the way up to $1 million in revenue. So while that's a pretty big chunk, when you think about, small businesses, including businesses that could be up to 500 or fewer employees and 100 million in revenue, that's obviously not the full breadth of what the media and the Small Business Administration considers a small business. So one interesting little fact is that 98% of businesses have fewer than 20 employees. So non-employer firms are the absolute most common type. And the median take-home pay for small business owners in the states overall is about $26,000. Median revenue nationwide is about $51,000 for small businesses. So, when you're talking about the bulk of small businesses, they are, made up of one owner. I think it's 82% 82% nationally are non-employer firms. So only 18% of registered small businesses even have employees. And those that do have employees are still, way under what you might sort of think of as a small business employer in terms of both revenue and size of business. All right. And I apologize, I'm having some trouble seeing the chat. So please feel free to raise your hand or unmute if you have a question. I'm happy to address any questions that may come up. And while I can't see the chat, I'll stop sharing a little bit to check the chat. All right. So when you think about the biggest hurdles to small businesses in terms of especially growing from a new business or an early stage from the startup phase, obviously the conception out there is that lack of access to capital is the biggest hurdle or a big hurdle for new or early stage businesses. And I certainly don't disagree. In fact, when we did some polling on our application, one of the questions that we ask is, what's a current challenge that you're facing in your business? And when we analyzed several hundred of those responses, one of the top 3 answers was lack of funding or lack of access to capital. So there's definitely an issue there. But as I said, it became top 3, number 3, whereas the other 2 had to do with hiring and with growing their market or with sales. So related to capital in terms of bringing in cash, but most small businesses are self-funded. Honestly, from start to finish, most small business owners don't access capital markets. So what we're seeing is, obviously there's a growth in non-traditional capital options. There's more crowdfunding. There are now, many different types of microloan programs that can be really valuable to small business owners. But even with these new options, we're seeing that many, many people don't actually access those capital markets, even if you want to call that a capital market, those alternative sources of capital, because they're self-funded from start to finish. They're entering their startup phase with whatever they're able to bootstrap, and then funding the business from sales from beginning to end. So accessing the capital markets is not necessarily even in the minds of a lot of our entrepreneurs. Whether or not it should be is a good question, but I think there's a perception that a lot of people write up their business plan and they go and start shopping around for funding. And of course, those of us that work in this space know that that almost never works for brand new businesses. And in fact, many businesses never find themselves in a place where it's either desirable or possible to access that kind of loan. So we're interested in, the ways that people do make this work. And we've had examples in our peer groups of people doing crowdfunding, doing, accessing grants from either local providers or kind of niche providers who are looking to support certain types of businesses. We've also seen people in our peer groups launch Kickstarter campaigns, which is a great way both for them to bring some attention to their business or maybe to a new product that they're launching, and also to raise some money. But there's a lot of different ways in which business owners, bootstrap their businesses that don't fit with that sort of mental model of going out and finding an investor or a loan. Okay, so this is one of the misconceptions that I think I hear most commonly, and that is that businesses that survive the first year are, kind of bulletproof. That if you make it past the first year, which is obviously a time that's particularly vulnerable in our minds to failure, then you're in it for the long haul. And of course, the reality is that business owners are constantly hustling. So when we look at our membership, a huge portion of our business owners at some point in the life of their business either open an additional business, whether that's, becomes an additional focus of theirs or it's sort of a side hustle, as we said here. They take full or part-time jobs to stay afloat. They work in the gig economy and do, delivery driving or Uber driving. There are a lot of ways that, particularly in the segment of businesses that represents the largest segment in the country, and those are those businesses that are under $1 million in revenue, there's a lot of ways that owners are making it work past that first year, all the way through the life of their business. So I think the idea that the business is no longer vulnerable after, proving success is clearly not true. I think almost anyone in this room probably knows that there is no point at which success is a given, right? We say that here, but it's true that, not only is success never a given, it requires that constant effort. It's also true that our business owners are really creative. They're pivoting, they're finding new ways to generate revenue, new revenue lines of business, or even new initiatives, totally new entities that they're building out to support whatever business it is that they sort of came into entrepreneurship with. So it's been really, interesting to see. In fact, I think post-COVID, we've seen an increase in people who are balancing entrepreneurship with, like I said, working in the gig economy or doing other things. We'll talk a little bit later in the summit today about who our program is ideally suited for. But one of the areas where we've had to have the most conversation around who our program is best for is this question of working in the business full time. Because for a long time, we have formulated our program to be best for people who work in the, we've said it's best for people who work in their business full time. And that's partly because we really want people who have full commitment to making it work, right? There's a difference between looking to your business to be a viable source of support for you and your family and community, or looking at it as a hobby. And so initially, I think we formulated this sort of achievement of getting to be in business full time as a way to test commitment. Over the years, it's also become important because we're looking at people who have sufficient control over their schedule to really make a commitment to coming to the meetings. But we've had to have a lot more conversation about what does it mean to be full-time, or should we be thinking about this a little bit differently? And that's something that I certainly am also open to some feedback on from people who either are business owners themselves or who work in this space. You know, how do you sort of know when the business is sufficiently viable to be something that you're ultimately hoping will be a full-time concern, but you haven't gotten there yet? And, you know, how else would you sort of formulate that commitment question? Because it's been challenging for us. All right, this it's not exactly a myth. Certainly, a lot of people start their businesses to pursue a passion. But what we see quite frequently are the accidental entrepreneurs, right? And since 2020, the number of business starts has grown significantly. The pace at which people are registering new business entities and starting new businesses has quickened. A lot of those people may have been laid off, may have discovered, you know, because of COVID, that they really wanted to be in a different environment than an office. We did some market research with our members a couple of years ago and had several people say in their interviews that they really started a business because they couldn't work for anybody else, right? They don't thrive in the structure of an organization, or they want to be an employer who's better than anything they've experienced out in the market. So there are a lot of people who are coming into business not just because they have a great idea for a market or product, a service or product that they want to market, and not just because they have a passion to solve a problem, but they're coming into business because they have a personal need to support themselves, their families, their communities, and they have a desire to be good business owners. So, you know, I think one of the things that's been most interesting to me over the years is that once people really, even if they start with a passion for what they're doing, once they're in business and discover how much it takes to run a business, for a lot of people, that desire to just get good at being in business becomes really, you know, front burner. And those accidental entrepreneurs, or the people who got into it because they just knew that they needed to do this and, you know, pursue that passion, have really, you know, a different journey than those who come into this with some sort of business education. The great majority of our members, and in fact, the great majority of business owners, do not have formal business education. So, you know, don't be concerned about whether or not that education is required, but it's part of the reason that all of these entrepreneurial support organizations are so important. And I know we have several partners with us on the call today, which I'm really grateful to see. And part of the other reason that that's really important is, you know, the type of the support that we provide is that learning continues forever, right? It goes on and on. So I'm going to take just a quick break from the screen share. And I've got a couple more slides, but I want to be able to look at the chat. And I also just want to be able to ask quickly, are there any questions about the entrepreneurs that we serve, or about the research that we've been doing on entrepreneurs in the community? It may come up in my later slides, but I thought I would give people an opportunity to just raise their hands if there's anything they want to know now.
I have been watching the chat. I haven't seen too much there, Katie.
Okay. Thank you for keeping an eye on it for me, Deborah. I can't seem to figure out how to make it work when I'm on screen share. So I'll go back to my slides, but feel free.
And just so you know, we're gonna close this at 10:30. So you have about 15 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's see here. All right, so now we're getting into some stereotypes about business owners that, I think people are pretty aware may not apply in the way that they did once upon a time, but there is still a stereotype of a startup business owner, right? The stereotype is a young, rich man, works in tech, and there's certainly plenty of examples of people who fit that profile, who are, starting businesses, who are successful in business, not to say that they're not. And so I don't want to in any way act like that's not, still operating in the sphere. But where we see the biggest growth in entrepreneurship are from women, from first generation immigrants, people of color, and retirees. There is faster growth in each of those four segments than there is overall in terms of new business starts. And not only is there faster growth in terms of new business starts, but we're seeing that some of those categories of business are starting to catch up with the rate of growth and the size that sort of investor funded, angel funded startups have been able to achieve in the past. So there's definitely a lot of reason to be excited about the increasing diversity in the small business community. But I think there's also some really interesting challenges that we need to start thinking about. One of the conversations that we've seen in a couple of our peer groups is about succession planning. And for a lot of people, particularly who start their businesses later in their careers or later in their lives, that succession planning question is on the table almost from the time they start the business, right? Because there's a question about, do I intend for this business to end with me, or do I intend for this business to be a legacy for my kids, or am I trying to grow a business to a saleable place on a faster timeline? So that's one of the kinds of things that we're hearing more questions about, not just from people who are retirees when they start their business, but it's certainly more pressing for people who come into their small business journey, with an intention to exit in, let's say, less than 10 years. The other conversations that we're seeing a lot in our peer groups are certainly coming from some of these other segments of business owners. The first generation immigrant business owners that we work with have told us that part of what they need more support on is just learning the business norms of the United States. And so we've really been trying to be mindful of the fact that, as our curriculum, as I was mentioning, we call it our competency model for small business owners, was developed, it didn't necessarily reflect the challenges that business owners face today, or that growing segments of business owners face today. And so we've been working to develop some sort of new tools around how to navigate succession planning, how to navigate the US business climate. Certainly for women and people of color, we're looking at, all of the ways that women and business owners of color can access contracts, what different certifications are valuable to them, and just having those conversations in our groups. One of the things I like to say about our groups is that they are complementary of everything else you can do to grow your business. There's nothing that's off the table in our groups. You can raise any subject, you can talk about anything. And most of our business owners are also accessing other types of support. So they're going to get their certifications for minority or women-owned businesses. They're going to, other resources where they can learn some of the basics of accounting, or finding, other support, and then coming back to their groups and sharing what they learned. So it's a really wonderful sort of synergy between all of the different support that's out there and what you can do with a peer group. All right, so speaking of business owners and all the things that they have to do, I would say there is a common sort of conception of business owners that they're superheroes and that they're managing it all on their own. And I am not here to say that business owners are not superheroes, because sometimes I think they genuinely are. But of course, I am here to say that the most successful small business owners are lifelong learners, they are connectors, they thrive in community, and they look for support, right? So I think Simon gave us some really good examples of how he figured out when he needed support or where he needed support, or in the case of hiring, where he was, willing and ready to let go of some control. But what we see with the business owners who enter our peer groups is that it's kind of a self-selecting process, right? You don't join a peer group if you're not interested in sharing your challenges and your successes with other people. And you don't join a peer group if you're not willing to listen to advice from other people. But those people seem to grow faster and stronger than others. And I'm actually going to share some information about our groups, particularly drawn from the data collection that we did this past year. So first of all, in case I have any current members in the main room right now listening to me, I just want to say a huge thank you to our members who are willing to share information about their business performance year after year. We collect information about revenue, owner's compensation, and jobs in your businesses, both at application, and then once a year, we ask for an update. So we do that at tax time, and it takes quite a while for us to get all the data in and to do some analysis. But we're really just starting to roll out what we learned about the 2023 results for members of our program. And as I mentioned, it's sort of, we batch our program in 3-year chunks. We have some members who've come back for more than one 3-year chunk, and we certainly have people who don't necessarily stay for the full 3 years. But what we see is that somewhere around 2 to 2.5 years of participation in the program, there's really notable results here. So this is the average amount of time that our respondents were in the program, 2 to 2.4 years, depending on which of these categories we're talking about, and the growth that they achieved. So our members overall, and like I said, we currently have about 400 overall, starting revenue when they applied to the program was just over $104,600. And in the span of 2.1 years, let me make sure I have that right. Yes, 2.1 for this. And the time span is a little bit different just because of the different respondents in each category. But we saw growth of $48,000. Obviously, that's almost 50%. And we know that that is outpacing national growth significantly. So at a national level, depending on the surveys that you look at, only about 20 to 40% of small businesses reported growth in 2023, revenue growth in 2023. In our program, it was almost 60% of members who reported revenue growth in 2023. And on average, the growth was almost 50% of their starting revenue. And you can see that the start point for women members, which for us is about 63% of our program, we happen to skew more female, but for women members, that starting revenue was lower than the average overall revenue in our program. And the same was true for minority members. But the amount of growth, the dollar amount, was almost the same, which I find really interesting. And it doesn't mean that those women and minority-owned businesses have quite caught up at the end of 2 to 2.4 years, but it is true that they are outpacing national numbers for both women and minority-owned businesses at a similar rate to the overall revenue growth of our members. So that's exciting for us to see. And of course, we want to continue to make change that will help to narrow that gap in the overall revenue as well. And we're really dedicated to being sure that everyone who's in our program gets the resources and support that they need to grow to whatever size they're trying to get to. And so, it's interesting to think about. The other thing that we see is that sometimes people's conception of where they want to go or what they're trying to get from their business obviously changes over time. And I think we've seen in our peer groups that some women and minority business owners come in with less, maybe a smaller growth intention that does grow over time as they access more success and more support. And so, I'm excited to see that we're starting to see a narrowing of that gap. In our peer groups, as it says here, those businesses that come in as non-employer businesses have a much lower starting revenue than businesses that come in with employees. And that may also just reflect coming in at an earlier point in their business, because while we require people to have been in business for at least a year, we have people enter the peer groups after decades of business. So the life cycle of your business, the phase of your business that you're in could be quite different at application. But those that are applying before they've ever hired an employee come in with an average revenue of almost $38,000 and grow to $71,000. So that's, almost double there. If they became employer businesses, so I know this graph is a little detailed, but if they entered our program as a non-employer, and in these first 2.4 years became an employer, they did enter with a higher starting revenue. And they also achieved double the growth of those that did not become employer businesses. So we're kind of parsing this information. One of the things that seems to be true about the entrepreneurial support ecosystem overall is that there's a lot of interest in job growth. And of course, that's true. There's always been a lot of interest in the economic development space and job growth. But one of the things that I think is increasingly being recognized by communities, government, and other leaders in our communities is that most communities are not going to be saved by having a giant, corporate employer come and locate their headquarters there and employ many, many people. What instead seems to be the more accepted truth, the thing that people are acknowledging more and more, is that small businesses are the largest employer, the largest segment of employers in the nation, employing over half of people who have employment are small businesses. And some of those are very small businesses that employ only a few people. So it's exciting to me to see that we're starting to gain some traction with recognition of the fact that when non-employer businesses get adequate support, when they get connected to the resources they need, they can become employers and support not only their own families, but their community by creating good jobs. And so these numbers are reflective of the difference right now between those that become employers and those that don't. There was also some really interesting research that came out this year about the difference in satisfaction, prosperity, and overall sort of self-assessed happiness between non-employers and employer businesses. And it does look like the benefits of employing people are not only financial, but also psychological and emotional. There's a lot to show that being an employer increases your overall satisfaction. I know we're getting close to time, so I'm going to stop.
Katie, can you answer one question while the numbers are still up? How does this compare to previous years' impact data?
So thank you for the question. It honestly is validation of we've only been collecting data for 3 years at a scale that allows us to actually do this kind of analysis. So when we collect the data, we are making sure that we have enough participants, that we have enough members share their data to actually be representative of our entire membership and of each little sort of segment of the membership. So We will only report numbers that we feel are reflective of the overall membership. And we've done that kind of mass data collection for 3 years in a row. And we've seen really similar rates of growth for those 3 years. This year was slightly accelerated. We had a slightly larger revenue and job growth than we've had in the previous 2 years. Not hugely larger, but I think as our membership size grows and as we're recruiting throughout Western Pennsylvania, not just in the urban areas of Pennsylvania, we are seeing that we are getting both slightly higher starting revenue on average and slightly faster growth in revenue and jobs. Any other questions? Let me stop this share here.